Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast. I'm your co-host, joined by Seth Wilson, the other co-host of Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing wonderful. We mentioned, I think, on the last episode that the Indiana Pacers are a fun team to watch right now, and last night's game just kind of added to the catalog, if you will, of their impressive performances this season. That was quite the game.
You're going to get me into my old college play-by-play job that I used to have, down 14 with like 2 minutes to go, 2.5 minutes to go, and they come back and win. They were down by 8 with 40 seconds left, and they still came back and won. The shot from Tyrese Halliburton that went all the way up to the rafters of Madison Square Garden and then came back down and went in. I mean, what a game. That was very exciting.
It was so much fun, and for those of us who are of my age group and grew up watching the Knicks and the Pacers in the '90s, boy, how much fun is this to have this rivalry renewed? And it's funny because my kids would be like, "Dad, why do you not like the Knicks?" And I was like, "You just don't
You like
understand
them?
if you weren't
Of
there
course
in the
you like
'90s."
them.
So it's just been fun. It's been fun to enjoy it with my kids now and having that renewal there, and just both teams competed hard, had a really great effort. Every play was, just contested all the way through. So hard fought game. I'm sure game twos could be very challenging, but
Oh,
so
yeah.
much fun to watch.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Glad we can chat about that a little bit. We want to continue our discussion about law office management and kind of what is the life cycle of a case as it comes through the law office. On the last episode, we talked about calendar management and how by managing your calendar well, that can help you get your tasks accomplished. So I encourage everybody to go back and listen to that episode. Check us out on YouTube, subscribe so you get all of these videos from us. But today we kind of wanted to talk about billing. How do we invoice clients? What is our strategy in invoicing clients? What's the best way to do it? So let me just open it up to you, Seth. What should solo attorneys and small law office attorneys know about billing?
Boy, what a great question, and one that every lawyer has to wrestle with as you're thinking about, especially if you're on your own or as part of a small firm, thinking about what is a billable activity, what's not a billable activity. Contrary to what may be the perception about lawyers, I think a lot of lawyers don't actually like the billing part of the practice. We enjoy what we're doing, but then asking for money sort of in exchange for that can be difficult. And that's obviously depending on your practice area, that's a challenge as well. And so figuring out even how to set what your hourly rate is and those kind of things are all discussions we probably won't dive into too deeply on today's episode, but maybe in the future. But just the practical aspects of utilizing a system like Clio that we both use as a practice management system is so beneficial to the actual process of putting time entries on an invoice and submitting those invoices to a client for payment. And so, kind of building on the concept we talked about of time blocking last week, one of the benefits of a integrated system like Clio is that you can go to your calendar, and if you have that entry related to a matter, you get the option to add time to that event entry. And so if you've written your event entry that in a manner that approximates what you actually did for the client on that file, you can just hit add time entry, and the time entry will actually pull in the description of the event as your time entry. And it'll pull in the duration of the event as the amount of time. Now, that could be adjusted very easily, or you could even start a timer there if you just wanted to do it that way. But it just helps with that facilitation of actually taking the work that you did and getting it on to an invoice. So that's one way I use the calendar and that time blocking thing to kind of further move forward in the law firm life cycle, if you will, or the life cycle of the case. How about you? What's the most common way you're seeing yourself and your staff?
The most common way is by using the time tracker in Clio. On the top bar of Clio, you've got, a search function, but then right next to it, you've got a time tracker, and you can just hit the play button and the timer will start going. And that's how uh, my staff usually does time tracking. And one thing that I like about the time tracking component of Clio is that it really helps in the way of accountability. So if you hit that time tracker and then you assign, what matter you're working on, so you're working on, a trust administration, you hit that time tracker, you click, I'm going to work on this particular matter for a trust administration, and then that's what I'm supposed to be working on, and so it helps you to stay focused on the tasks within that matter, so that you know that that's what you're supposed to be working on. That's how I do it for all my staff members. So I always want them to be working on something that is being tracked, and it might not be something that's billable. It might be administrative. It might be filing things, in the filing cabinet. Well, I still want you to track that so that we know how your time is being used. And that's a measure for how much time a certain task takes. And it helps set expectations for, what other assignments I can give to the other attorney in the law firm or my paralegal. It gives a good sense of what can be done with the time that you have during the day. So always having that timer running on something, I think, is really important. And I must confess, today I haven't done a very good job of that. Actually, the worst job in all year long in tracking that. So maybe I needed this more than others today. But time tracking is a great way to encourage accountability in the law.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like about the way Clio has this built up is there's always multiple ways to do the same activity. And you can get to the time entry screen or module, if you will, from various places throughout the system. And so the one constant is that top bar that you mentioned with the play button. And that play pause button is really important because it keeps that timer rolling. And so when you're navigating throughout Clio, you kind of see, oh, I'm working on this particular matter, and it keeps your attention locked on that for the most part. And so that's really helpful. And so the other thing that's really neat about it is as you start building in, you mentioned kind of the billable and non-billable designation, which you can actually set on a per entry basis by just clicking this is a non-billable activity or yes, it is a billable activity. You can choose in your settings whether to show non-billable activities on the invoice itself, or it will keep those off the invoice and only put on the invoice those billable activities that you predefined. Now, for certain people, if I'm looking at a team member's time, I want to see all their time. I want to see both billable and non-billable for the reasons you just mentioned. We want to make sure we're allocating resources well throughout the office. We want to make sure we understand what particular tasks take what time to complete. And so we can build those into some of the checklists that we talked about earlier and put those estimated durations in there to kind of give us an idea of, oh, I've already assigned X number of hours to this staff member this week. I probably shouldn't give that project to them and keep things moving forward. So a little bit more advanced on that side. But when you're looking at that billable versus non-billable, it really gives you a total picture of the actual time it takes to perform the service that you're performing for your client. Now, you're not going to bill them for that necessarily in terms of all the administrative work that really isn't a legal function or part of the engagement agreement to bill them for, but it helps you understand, okay, when I take in a case, this is kind of the minimum that it's going to take for me to actually perform services for this client. And now I know that versus I'm guessing and just trying to feel my way through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I really like that feature to show the non-billable entries on the invoice because it really communicates well to the client how much your law firm has really worked on the case. And there are some cases where you put in a whole lot more in non-billable entries than you would have expected to because there are just issues that come up and you can't really bill the client for it because it's going to be an outrageous bill that they just can't afford and it's going to be frustrating to them to receive, an unexpectedly high bill. But if you show those non-billable entries on the invoice, then the client's going to understand, well, he's actually kind of gone above and beyond. He could have charged me more, but he chose to treat this as non-billable. And so I think that's a great way to actually have a happy client at the end of the day, is to show all of your work, on that invoice. And the more detail that is on the invoice, the better it is. Sometimes the client will say, there's a phone call in this entry. Well, who did you call? And the more detail that you can provide in that description, the more the client is going to understand what you've done for them. And it's really just a way of showing value that you've provided to the client. The more detail you can put into that invoice, the better. The more non-billable entries so that they see, they're going to be happier. And so it's a great feature that Clio has.
Yeah, and that you kind of anticipated what my next question was going to be for you, which is, how do you balance the dichotomy of, well, I'm spending all my time tracking my time and writing out these invoice entries and not actually getting work done, and balancing the two between there. What's kind of your rule of thumb in terms of what is a sufficient level of detail versus that's not going to be acceptable on a bill?
Yeah, I I try to at least put a name as to who I called. So I tried to write down to whom I sent an email, so I know that the parties involved in the communication are listed in the entry. That's kind of my rule of thumb. Sometimes it's just hard. Sometimes this may not be the best example for people, but I'll just put work on file because there are so many little things that need to be done that can't. If I tracked, every single instance, every single task, it would be more than what the actual task is. So yeah, I do wrestle with that. I think it's a tension. Some of it I think is knowing your client and knowing what the expectations are. Some clients are never going to question a bill and they'll be happy to pay and they're fine. Other clients not so much, and they're going to question, if you just put phone call, was that to me or was that to somebody else? Are you sure that was my case? They're going to be skeptical about it. So know thy client is a good rule there. Yeah, I don't have a great answer. It's a decision I'm making on every single time entry. I haven't really formulated a rule necessarily for that. What about you? What is your thought process on the tension between putting detail into the time entry and moving on to the next task?
Yeah, I think the way you kind of encapsulated the familiarity of your client with working with a law firm and a lawyer, that's a big key for me, because if they have some familiarity with the lawyer and the firm, they're going to understand this is why you're not necessarily giving full detail. You could actually go in and see, hey, we copied you on the email, or we sent you the letter that we provided you with, an explanation by phone or something. And so that client who has that familiarity and as a result trust, they know that you're not going to overbill them and they don't have to scrutinize every particular entry, because you've demonstrated that as their lawyer. You've been fair to them. You only bill for things that are billable. You give them sufficient levels of detail. On the front end, if someone's never worked with our firm before, I will tend to be a little bit more verbose potentially than I might otherwise be, just to get them familiar with how billing is going to work. And this is obviously geared toward, if we're in an hourly case, we want to, handle those things with that appropriate level of detail. So what I developed over the years was some standard ways I would handle the sort of introduction of what I was doing. So if I'm going to bill for a phone call, for example, it's going to be phone call from or phone call to whoever it is. And then I always put a regarding. What are we talking about? Now, it may be a lot of different things. So you may roll that into regarding case status. And then in my description and my note that I kept, I will keep detailed notes inside of there. So if the client ever says, hey, tell me about this May 22nd phone call with opposing counsel regarding settlement, I can actually go back and pull up my description and say, yeah, we talked about all these three things. And then remember, I sent you an email with a summary of all of that. Oh yeah, yeah, I got it. No problem. So I always want to make sure that I have sufficient backup for the work that I did to be able to explain it. But I do try to use those billing entries more as a higher level summary a lot of times than I will trying to communicate to the clients what I did in great detail, because I find a lot of times I'll spend more time crafting the billing entry than actually getting work done on the file. But I will also have that conversation with the client and say, hey, if there's ever a question, just let me know, because we can talk about anything on the invoice, anything on the file. I'm never offended if you question that. I want to make sure that you have your questions answered and you understand what we're doing. And I always feel like I have good documentation to back up anything that's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great words of advice there about putting the topic of the conversation in the phone call, to whom the phone call was made, all of that kind of stuff is really, really good. Let me pivot a little bit to, it's on subject, but a little bit of a different question here. When an individual is starting his or her law practice, they've got to make the decision of how I'm going to bill. We've really been talking about hourly entries, but that's not the only way to bill. You've got hourly work that you can do, but you can also bill with flat fees. You can also bill contingency fees. And so how do you decide how you're going to structure the fee agreement with the client?
I'll give you the classic lawyer answer and we can stop there, right? It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you really do have to address, and I know we kind of say that as lawyers a lot, and it's kind of cliche, but it really is dependent on the facts and the circumstances of that particular case. So on a contingency case, that's the type that a lot of folks would be familiar with from lawyer advertising of no fee unless we recover. The no fee never says no expenses. That's a whole different topic. So just be aware, as you're talking about that, there's attorney fees and then there's case related expenses. And those are both sides of the coin that you need to be aware of as you're going into that. So I always try to explain that to my clients. Like, you've heard this, let's make sure we understand what this means in a contingency contract. But typically that would mean that the client doesn't have an out of pocket responsibility for billing on any kind of frequency, like on a monthly basis, or paying a flat fee up front for you to get started, or a retainer or something. So the recovery and the payment of the fees and expenses is at the end of the case, typically on a contingency case where you reach some sort of settlement or verdict or judgment, and then whatever's received is divided by that contingency fee term. So it's a percentage of recovery after expenses are paid and so on. And so that can be very helpful for a client who doesn't have a lot of available funds in the right case. And so that's an option for folks to consider. If you're a young lawyer starting out, contingency fees are typically a little more difficult to do because you're not going to get paid anything until that case is resolved. And that could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years. You just don't know. That's something to factor in as you're thinking about it. It's great for the clients. It gives them the flexibility to hire a lawyer that they may not otherwise be able to afford. The lawyer has to be in the position to cash flow the case, so to speak, until such time as the recovery is made. So that's contingency. And then I'll kick it back to you, talk about flat fees.
Yeah, flat fees is primarily how I do a lot of my work, especially in the estate planning field. Whenever a client hires me for an estate plan, they feel comfortable knowing that it's a flat fee because they know what they're getting into, right? They know what the cost is going to be. They know that they're not going to be nickel and dimed for every time entry. If I've got to work more on a case than usual, it's not going to impact the client. So they've got some security built into that flat fee arrangement. And so it's great from the client's perspective, but also from the attorney's perspective. If you have a flat fee, that gives you, the wherewithal to be able to scale your business in a lot of ways, because you can develop a process that if this client fits into this box. This is the task list that you need to accomplish. These are the provisions that need to be in the will or trust or whatever the document is, the business agreement, the operating agreement, all that kind of stuff. You can structure your system around that flat fee and really come out on top. You're providing the value to the client that the fee really deserves. But also, you've got a structure in place where you can become very efficient and become more profitable, be able to do more work, do more trust, do more wills, do more business plans for people, and provide the same value to every single client. And I mean, I think that's the way to go, especially for a solo attorney that's starting out. Make sure that the clients know exactly what they're getting into, and from there they can feel comfortable with it, and you'll be able to build your practice around the processes that go into that flat fee. So I definitely encourage people to experiment with the flat fee arrangement, and I've had to experiment with what is the best price point. Some people are not going to go for a certain level of price for a certain level of documentation. So you really got to feel where the market is with your clientele, what the price points are. That's always a difficult choice. Flat fees are more difficult, I would say, to estimate what the market is on those things. With internet, it's a little bit easier, but it still can be pretty difficult. Hourly rates are kind of similar. Again, Google these things. Google hourly rates in your metropolitan area, your community. Same with flat fees for the kinds of documents that you're going to do. But again, flat fees help you to scale your business, and I encourage people to experiment with it.
Yeah, I agree, Thomas. I've really come to appreciate the flat fee model in terms of the predictability that it brings and the consistency. Frankly, from the lawyer standpoint, if I know I have a flat fee on a matter, I feel less resistance to working on that matter or bringing others people into the matter. I know that at the end of the day, our analysis is our net effective rate, right? So if it took us twice as long to do it as we estimated it would, that just cut my net effective rate in half. I don't want to do that, so I've got to be, judicious about that and responsible for it. But it just takes away the feeling that I get, and I don't know if every lawyer's like this, but like, okay, I'm billing this email, but do I bill it? Do I non-bill it? I've got all this guesswork that I'm doing as I'm going through, rather than just focusing on getting the work done and working out through the process. And so one of the things I really like on the flat fee side is I think it takes away that uncertainty and that I have to make all these decisions, both from the client side and their perspective. They're not getting a surprising bill that they weren't expecting. And then, wow, did they really mean to send me that? Or was it that, you've created some of that distrust in what should be a very high level trusting relationship between the attorney and the client. And so kind of removing any of those opportunities for mistrust, right? So if you put a billing entry on that wasn't supposed to be a billing entry, it was supposed to be a non-billing entry, but you didn't mark the little checkbox and it was just an accident, that communicates something to the client. And you don't have that when you have a flat fee. And so what I like to do with that is just remove that uncertainty from the client's perspective, give the lawyers and their team the freedom to say, look, this is what we got on this case. We're going to do our best to be as efficient and effective as possible for the client. And I really do think it's kind of a win-win, because then you can take all the time and look at it and say, okay, well, we really guessed well on, or estimated well on this one as to the time it would take, but not so much over here. So what was the difference? What are the variables? What should we consider when we meet with the client and quote that flat fee? I'm much more of the type that will look at each situation to figure out what my fee is going to be on that. I kind of have that foundation built. So we put together those rate sheets at the beginning of the year, and that serves as the foundation. But there may be a couple variables. We're combining some services, so I know I don't have as much information to gather. I don't have to charge full freight over here because I can kind of roll that in over here. So I kind of build that up a little bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that that's good. And, I've had the experience where I've spoken to a client where maybe I do a flat fee and then I got to do some other work related to the flat fee work, but I don't know exactly how long that's going to take. So I have suggested let's do the flat fee portion of it and then do the hourly rate for this other work. And word to the wise, clients don't like that. They like the flat fee itself. They want to know exactly what they're going to pay. They don't want any kind of doubt with, okay, I'm going to pay you this many thousands of dollars and then you're still going to build me more. It's been a bad decision. It didn't go through for me. And so that's a recommendation. If you're going to do a flat fee, stay true to the flat fee. Don't try to, add. If you've got to add some additional fee into it, just build it into your flat fee, and then if you miss it, you'll be better off for the next time to quote better. But I would encourage people to stay away from any kind of hourly billable rate if you're going to be quoting a flat fee too.
Yeah, there is such a thing as a hybrid fee agreement, right? If we do this for the flat part, we may do this above and beyond for an hourly part. It's tough because you're never quite sure from either perspective, well, which side of the fee agreement am I on? Am I on the contingency side, or am I on the flat fee side, or am I on the hourly side? By default, I track everything as hourly, even if it's a flat fee, so I can make sure I can do the analysis and again figure out what that net effective rate was for us. But that creates that ambiguity. And for the client, you really want the client to have that clarity and you want them to have that peace of mind that this is what they've committed to. You're going to be able to deliver their solution for what they've committed to. And that's a really helpful thing. And one last thing on this topic that's relatively recent in my thinking, it's not a new concept, but just in terms of how my particular practice could offer this type of tiered flat fee pricing. And I've come up with some ideas on that where it's just kind of like stair steps. So if you're at certain, like tier one, this is the service package that you could enter into with the office. And here's kind of the scope of what we think that would take. And here's the cost, and we'll spread it over 12 months. And so that gives some predictability and budgeting capability to the clients. And it gives us some freedom from, boy, this took a little bit longer than we thought, but really it's not significantly longer, but we don't really want to bill it. It just removes some of those decisions so you're able to focus on delivering results to clients. And then obviously you have tier two, which had a little bit more expansive offering maybe. And then tier three, maybe your best offering and say, look, here's my personal cell phone number kind of thing. And if you need me, I'm available for you. So again, just ideas on there's ways to structure it for sure. I mean, I want to start with the premise always that what I'm quoting is a fair flat fee for the work and the service that is going to be provided. And I don't feel like I can do that well unless I have good data around it. And so that's always hard when you're starting out to know what is a fair price. And so I think your point to go out and do your research on that as best you can in your marketplace, in your area, to see what's reasonable, because that's our ethical obligation as lawyers, is to charge a reasonable fee. And so I'm always looking at that. I'm always looking at the data to really understand, okay, how much time, how much effort, how much energy, how much of my experience comes into this, how much benefit does that give to the client? So what's the true value that we're offering here? And we try to price that accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's great. I like the tiered structure there that you've got for your clients. Yeah, so a lot of different options. Percentage, not just of contingency, but I'm thinking of estate and trust administration. Some attorneys will do, instead of a billable rate on that, they'll do, a percentage of probate assets. Some attorneys do a percentage of probate and non-probate assets to do in estate and trust administration. And so you got some options along that line as well. Just you gotta figure it out. It's trial and error. It's part of the hard. It's one of the hard parts of law practice is figuring out what is the best way to have clients pay the bill and be happy with it. I hope people have viewed this and gotten some tidbits of information that will be helpful to them. Use those non-billable entries, show them on the invoice. That will help clients to understand how they're paying the attorney, being upfront with the client about how they're going to be invoiced. Those are some of the takeaways I would say for how to bill clients.
Yeah, just a couple other things to kind of encapsulate that from my perspective. Be consistent with your bills, so send them out on the same time every month, and send your follow-ups and set your follow-ups accordingly. Don't let those account receivables go. Don't not make a decision on a bill right away and let it languish. Not that I'm guilty of that myself, thinking of several bills that I have in that status right now. But having that consistency over time, having that conversation with the client. If you see a bill that looks odd, don't send them the bill. Call them and say, "Hey, I'm looking at the bill and it, got a little more intense than we thought it might. What do we want to do here?" And have that conversation. If you send the bill out without any context and any explanation, you're going to already start off the discussion on the wrong foot. Again, not that I know that from personal experience. So the billing thing is very hard, and so it's easy to avoid, but it's the most important thing because that's what's going to keep the lights on and keep the office moving and enable you to serve more clients and accomplish your goals. So make sure that's a priority. Going back to the time blocking, block out time to prepare your bills, block out time to review your bills, and block out time to send your bills. And so the review would also include edit with that. But you want to make sure that each of those elements is blocked out every single month if that's the billing period that you choose. And then be very disciplined on that consistency for your clients. They know it's coming. And if it's a couple of days late, that's going to throw off their planning. And that's a tough thing as well.
Yeah. Well, good deal, Seth. Appreciate that discussion on billing and invoicing and tracking time. All good stuff there. We want to encourage everybody to subscribe to the YouTube page, hit subscribe, and support the podcast. That will help get the word out to other attorneys that are looking into starting their own law practice, hanging their own shingle. That's what we're trying to do at the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast is to be a resource for individuals that are thinking about that. And our motto is for the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast, helping lawyers launch, and that's what we're trying to do. Seth, any closing remarks?
No, just check out the channel. There's a lot of resource out there. If you can, like and subscribe because that increases the visibility on all the ranking algorithms and all that fun stuff. And hopefully you found this valuable. I think we say this every week, but if there are questions, feel free to reach out to us, put a comment on the video, and we'll try to answer those on a future episode.
Thank you, Seth. We'll talk to everybody next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Thomas.